And we've got one that I have the honor right now of introducing. Nate Harter is a relative newcomer to Decatur County, having only arrived in 1993. After a distinguished career as an athlete, leader, and scholar at Greensburg High School, Nate was blessed by the community with a Lilly Scholarship, which brought into sharp focus his dedication to learning a trade and building a career for a future return to Decatur County. Nate used his Lilly Scholarship to attend Butler University, where he earned varsity letters in track and field while serving in student government and fraternal leadership, and was selected to represent Butler nationally as a finalist for the prestigious Truman Scholarship. After graduating from Butler, Nate enrolled at the Indiana University Meyer School of Law, where he excelled in the practical experiences the school had to offer. He was the champion of the school's Sherman Minton Moot Court competition and served as captain of the school's national trial competition team, which finished near the top in the country. He was also president of the school's chapter for the Federalist Society, a conservative group which stands for federalism, limited government, and judicial restraint. After an internship in the Decatur County Prosecutor's Office, Nate was convinced that coming home to practice law was possible, and he was very fortunate to land in the office of the Stephen Legal Group, where attorney Chris Stephen and office manager Valerie Stephen have been hard at work showing him the ropes. Nate married his high school sweetheart Rachel, and they lived together back home again in Greensburg, Indiana. I give you, ladies and gentlemen, the next prosecutor for Decatur County, Nate Harter.
Boy, is it good to be home. Can you guys all hear me in the back? A few of the speakers that had this down? No? All right, well, we'll adjust to the day. Is that better? Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Representative Frye, for that warm introduction, and to Chairman Larry Meyer for inviting me to be the keynote speaker this evening. I understand that usually at Lincoln Day dinners, the keynote speaker is some dedicated and prestigious civil servant or party leader, and I'm sorry you got me instead. But I hope that what I have to say tonight will be, if not words of wisdom, then words of encouragement about where we're going as a party and what we have the ability to do right here in Decatur County. Now, I know we've been here for roughly the length of a small airplane flight, so if you need to get up and walk around, go outside, grab something to drink, or use the restroom, I promise not to get too distracted. I'll try to stay on message. Make yourself comfortable. I managed to cut the speech down to at least around 2 hours by taking out the half hour on foreign policy, so we'll go from there. It's important for all of you who don't know me to know that I was raised by a professor of philosophy and leadership studies. And so my introduction to conservatism was not about the Republican Party and politics. It was about conservative ideas. I was steeped in the writings of Bill Buckley, National Review, Milton Friedman, and Thomas Sowell. And I attended symposia on ideas by institutions like the Intercollegiate Studies Institute and the Federalist Society and the Philadelphia Society. And high school was about sports and extracurriculars, not about the party. But I began to speak conservatism in my native language, if you will. And it wasn't until I got to Butler, thanks to the blessings of this community and the investment it made in me, that I began to understand the importance of the party infrastructure. The idea about going out to win races, choosing the right candidate, messaging, fundraising, optics. And I began to appreciate how important that was when I was asked to be chairman of the College Republicans. And we got to help out with Mayor Greg Ballard's campaign up in Indianapolis and a couple of congressional races. And I began to see that without the politics, without people like you in the party, the conservative ideas that I had been raised in were just ideas. And I began to appreciate that you have to blend those two. But as I left Butler, I wasn't ready to be a political candidate of any sort. And I knew I didn't want to have a career in running campaigns and operating from day to day, or being a policy analyst and trying to figure out how to tweak the variables by a 0.5% to get the budget to come out right. I'm glad there are those people. They're valuable, and I appreciate the work they've done for campaigns I've worked on, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I had to find something to do after Butler, and I found that my interests in community development and the institutions that we use to govern ourselves and in leadership found a neat meshing point in the study of law. And so I set out to go to law school down in Bloomington because I thought it would be a great academic adventure to study all of these things that bring my interests together. And it was that. It was a great academic experience. I got to sit at the feet of brilliant minds who have contemplated these institutions as they stretch across the generations from the English. It was great. Not terribly useful to most people, but it was great. And I had a chance to practice some of the more practical sides of law, alongside the greatest colleagues and some of the brightest and best students that this country has to offer. It was great. And along the way, I did meet with some success. And I discovered I liked the idea of practicing law. But the problem with that was that as I was leaving law school, if I was going to go practice law, I didn't, at that time, see any offices just falling into my lap to run for. And I still didn't want to run campaigns or be a policy analyst, so what was I going to do with all of this work I had done to learn conservative values and to learn the skills of running campaigns if I was just going to be a citizen? If I was just going to do my daily job and sort of provide a professional service? What then to do with all of those conservative principles and the know-how how to implement them if I wasn't going to do any of that? And like many of you, I came out of law school and I was looking at our political institutions, looking out to Washington, D.C. and Indianapolis, and I saw what many of you see, that our political institutions are in disarray, in gridlock, spinning out of control. So I started to wonder, what was I supposed to do with that if I wasn't going to be a candidate or run campaigns? And it was then that a voice came floating back to me, a lesson from my father, from my past. You know, I would come home having lost that tennis match, or gotten a worse grade on that paper than I thought I deserved, or just not getting that girl to pay attention to me. And my dad would say, you know, Nate, when the world's spinning out of control around you, clean your own nest. Now, if you'd seen my room as a 16-year-old, you might have thought the same thing I thought. He'd wanted me to pick up my laundry. But I did. That's where I started. And there was some truth in the lesson. As inevitably as I would pick up the clothing and put my paperwork in order, I would find that blue ribbon from the track meet the year before, or a letter from my grandfather that put everything into perspective. And a sense of peace came over me. And the world stopped spinning quite so fast. And so I was thinking about this lesson when I was trying to figure out, what do I do when Washington is in disarray and Indianapolis has the kerfuffles and all the media? What am I supposed to do? And that lesson came back, clean your own nest. You see, 2 days out of the year, we do really well around here. We citizens, we do great. On primary day, we elect the most rightward electable candidate we can find. And we send them off. We send Luke Messer to Washington, D.C., and Randy Frye, and Governor Pence, and Governor Daniels before them to Indianapolis. We do that. We do that every year. What more could we do than that? What would I do with the other 363 days a year? And the more I thought about that lesson, the more I realized that whole mindset was not a conservative one. It was wholly unconservative. The idea that if we elect the right people, and they believe purely enough, and we give them enough power, they can fix it, whatever it is. That's a liberal way of looking at the world, not the way we look at the world. And so the question is, what can we do right here at home to reach out into those things that we can control and clean our own nest? Well, that was a whole different level of question. And so when I try to ponder questions like this, I frequently turn to one of my heroes and the man for whom this dinner is named, Abraham Lincoln. Now, you might think that Abraham Lincoln is a strange place to start for inspiration on local leadership, right? Abraham Lincoln was this world leader, this historical figure that looms larger than life. But he didn't emerge from the womb that way. Abraham Lincoln started out as a small businessman, a family man, a backwoods legislator from a podunk nowhere. but he took care of the people around him and the place that was dear and home to him. And if that's all he'd ever done, that would have been a noble life. And so I'm no Lincoln scholar, but I've read a lot about the man, and as I looked at his example, I came away with 3 areas. 3 lessons that he has to teach us about what we should stand for right here at home, not as elected officials necessarily, but as citizens every day. And I grouped them the following way. We have to take care of our own character and our families. We have to make sure, in turn, that we're supporting infrastructure and a culture of enterprise. And finally, we have to remember that law and order is what permits all of those other liberties to survive. Now, the idea that Abraham Lincoln was honest, Abe, is almost cliche. I mean, the stories about him walking miles both directions, barefoot both ways, to correct a couple cents error in arithmetic and giving somebody change, or how hard he would work to replace a book he'd accidentally damaged. That's the stuff of cliche in history. And we can certainly try to mimic that, but I think there's a deeper lesson about Lincoln's character. Lincoln was the sort who brooded and thought deeply about what he believed on certain issues. On the most controversial issues of his age and perhaps facing our country in all history. And he took controversial positions. I mean, he was open to change. He was presented with new evidence, certainly. He wasn't stone-headed. He was open to compromise. That's how you get things done in the real world. But you always knew that when he made a decision, he had considered what was best for the people around him and for the place that he called home, and there was no questioning where he came from or what motivated him. You could disagree with him all you wanted, but there was no doubting that Abraham Lincoln acted according to his conscience and not according to how to score political points. And that's something that we can take into our own lives and that we should demand of our local leaders. Now, there are other stories that are almost cartoon-like and how famous they are with Lincoln about his children getting to ride around the Oval Office and the White House lawn on goats, and the stories about how deeply he loved his wife and how much he felt despair over the loss of his sons. And so we remember the importance of our families. We remember that that is the foundational unit of our society, and especially in communities like ours. How crucial it is that we get caught up sometimes in providing a good or a service and thinking we're taking care of our family, that we forget to go out into God's great nature that He's given us and take a hike and appreciate the beauty together. Or to prepare and enjoy a meal together and just sit and talk about our daily struggles and excitements. We need to remember as citizens and as leaders that when we go out and say, we'd like for you to give us control, we'd like for you to elect us, they're going to look right back into our hearts to see our character and to see whether we can take care of our families. And so that's a starting point, to take care of our own character and to take care of our families. But those individuals and those families, they have to have food and they have to have shelter. And so a community like ours has to take care of its economy, has to take care of its people being able to make money. And that starts with infrastructure and with enterprise. Now, Lincoln would have appreciated infrastructure. Lincoln, as a very young boy, crossed over the Ohio River into the deep, thick forests of southern Indiana and hewed an existence out of the countryside. And he watched as clearings became trading posts, became cities, became capitals. Abraham Lincoln, who took a flatboat down the Mississippi and walked back, versus Abraham Lincoln, who took a flatboat down the Mississippi and took a steamboat back. He understood and appreciated infrastructure and what it could do for our economy. He went on to vote for the development of canals and the development of railroads that ultimately won the war and turned the Union into an economic powerhouse. And so we locally, to the extent that we can, should be on the lookout for opportunities to invest in infrastructure. Lincoln got it wrong, by the way. The investment in canals was terrible, but the instinct to invest in infrastructure, keeping a careful eye out for boondoggles and wasteful spending, is a crucial investment because eventually you'll get to the railroads, or whatever that future innovation is that lays the groundwork for our future economic success, for ourselves and for future generations. But of course, that infrastructure is only as good as those of us who would use it. And so you constantly heard Lincoln talking about how a man should eat by the sweat of his own brow. And he usually was talking in the context of slavery, where slaves were working and their owners were profiting. But the lesson seems to follow through to today, that at every turn we need to be looking out to reward those who work, to to say work provides dignity. We want people to work. We want to provide them the skills to work. And we do a pretty good job of that here. You look at our schools and the investments they're making to make sure every one of our graduates can go work, and that's wonderful. We need to continue to build on that and look for opportunities to build on that. Also keeping in mind that there's an extra layer of richness to working so hard, or being so resourceful, being willing to take risks and scramble, that you end up in a position to provide opportunities to others. A community that rewards that kind of risk and that kind of effort will be a community that doesn't just work, but that begins to shine as a beacon to others. And so the culture of enterprise is something we have to foster, not just as elected officials, but as citizens every day. Now, of course, none of these institutions, Lincoln would be quick to remind us, makes any sense at all without law and order. And Lincoln was a lawyer. You well know that. He studied the law, and he understood that the importance of the law is not just to keep us safe from criminals, although that's a crucial part of it. But Lincoln lived in a day when there was mob rule, when might did make right, and when tyrants like Napoleon were not such a distant memory. And so Lincoln, in a speech to the young men at the Lyceum, gathered not unlike this, people who were concerned in how their community would move forward and what they would do in trying times. Lincoln said to them, yes, Americans are fundamentally opposed and find repugnant tyrants and tyranny of all sorts. And at the time he was talking about mob rule, the undermining of the law, but he might have just as easily been contemplating a distant reliance on government in a city that thinks it knows better than you do how to run your day-to-day life. Lincoln understood that although Americans are fundamentally opposed to that sort of tyranny, we're also human, and humans crave stability and safety and peace. And in the absence of order on the local level, they'll go turning to a tyrant. It's part of how we've gotten here today. We become more willing to accept a distant ruler who will provide some order. But Lincoln, his recipe for fixing this was not armed revolution. It wasn't throwing up your arms in despair. It wasn't even electing the right people to go to Washington, D.C. and fix it. His recipe was to talk to each member of that audience to say, you are the answer. When we go out into our communities and we radiate order, a sense of stability and calm, a sense that things change, but they change deliberately because we mean them to, conserving the best of our past while preparing for the best of the future, that community doesn't need a tyrant and will reject one. And through the institutions that we've held dear for years, like the law, we will safeguard those other liberties that we hold so dear. And so, we can follow these principles in our own lives. We can stand up for the institutions, our churches, our civic organizations, our political structures, our court systems. We can work hard and provide opportunities for others. We can stand up for infrastructure that will allow our economy to thrive, all while raising good, strong families and living just and upright lives before God and man. And when we do that, we stand a pretty good chance at making this a great place to call home. Now, when Larry and I first sat down to talk about me giving this speech, I didn't know I was going to be running for office. But since I am, and I'm here, I want to touch on that just briefly. Just briefly, I promise. Hi, my name is Nathan Harter, and I'm running for prosecutor here. You know, I know there are people out there saying he's too young, and he doesn't get it. But you know, for years, since before I left high school, I was getting to know you all, getting to know this place. Going out and talking to business owners and civic organization leaders and church leaders and political leaders and saying, who are we? Where are we going? What do we want to do in this community? What's our vision for the future? And what do we need to get there? So they're right. I'm young. But I'd argue about whether I get it. Because I've talked to you all, and I know you get it. I know that we don't elect public officials to go fix it. What this community needs are officials who say, let's fix it. They're willing to go out to every little chili supper and every town meeting and say, what are you struggling with? What can we do better? What do you need out of us? And then it's going to fight like hell to get it for you. And some of that the prosecutor can do, some of it the prosecutor can't. But again, it's not about me. It's not about my race. It's about me trying to do that, and it's about your judges trying to do that, and your town councilman trying to do that, and every citizen standing up for those values that Lincoln taught us about. On a day-to-day basis, 365 days a year, not just voting on primary day and election day, but saying these are our values and this is what we stand for, because I know that this community is made up of people who can do tremendous things. I watched you build a Y, I watched you build a Windermere Hospital, I've watched you raise money for children who have cancer. This community can do incredible things. And when people ask you if I get it, you tell them I burn with a passion for this place. And that I see the potential brimming just beneath the surface. And all we have to do is reach out and grab it. And it's not up to me, it's up to us. And if each one of you will come along, this place can be truly great. Together, I think we can build a place that we are proud of. A place that other communities look into and say, I want what they have. Where our children want to come home and build their lives here. The kind of place that you're going to come home to at the end of a long day, running a not-for-profit, patrolling our streets, teaching our children, providing a good or service. And you're going to put the car in the park and look up at that house, at the life that you've built. And you say to yourself softly, or in that place we often reserve for prayer, thank God. It is good to be home. Thank you.